The house was unusually quiet that evening. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock were the only sounds breaking the stillness. I sank deeper into the living room couch, absently flipping through a magazine, but my mind refused to focus. Something about Daniel had been bothering me for weeks. His behavior was subtly different, yet impossible to ignore. He lingered in places he used to pass by casually, watched me with a peculiar intensity, and sometimes laughed at jokes that weren't meant to be funny. "Mom," he called softly from the doorway, "can I ask you something?" I looked up and immediately noticed the change in his tone. There was an unusual edge to his voice, almost hesitant but filled with an odd curiosity. I gestured for him to sit. "Of course, Daniel. What's on your mind?" He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking around the room as though searching for an answer in the shadows. I've been feeling things," he murmured, almost too quietly. "Confusing things." I froze. That single phrase carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. I could sense the shift in our dynamic, subtle yet alarming. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing calm into my voice. "Feelings are natural, Daniel," I said carefully, choosing my words. "Everyone experiences them differently, and sometimes they can be complicated." He nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on me, lingering longer than seemed healthy. A shiver ran down my spine, and I realized, with growing concern, that this conversation could easily cross boundaries if left unchecked. "Daniel," I continued, trying to keep the tone gentle yet firm, "it's important to understand the difference between feelings and actions. Some feelings, no matter how strong, must never be acted upon. There are limits we cannot and will not cross." He didn't respond immediately, only stared at me with an intensity that was unsettling. The silence in the room grew heavy, almost suffocating. I sensed that something had shifted permanently. A boundary in our relationship had been nudged too far, and it was my responsibility to restore it before it escalated. I reached out and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm always here to talk, Daniel, but you must respect boundaries, yours and mine. Do you understand?" Finally, he nodded, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I knew this was only the beginning. The subtle shift I had felt for weeks was now undeniable, and I braced myself for what was to come. The days that followed the uneasy conversation were tense. Daniel's behavior became more noticeable, more daring, and undeniably unnerving. It wasn't overtly aggressive or disrespectful, but there was a subtle, creeping audacity in the way he moved through the house, the way he watched me. He would linger in rooms longer than necessary, sometimes standing silently while I worked or cleaned, as though waiting for something, though I didn't know what. One evening, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the smell of sautéing onions and garlic filling the air. Daniel had been unusually quiet all day, and I assumed he was in his room. Then I felt him behind me. The presence was sudden yet oddly deliberate. I stiffened instinctively, keeping my hands on the cutting board, trying not to reveal my unease. "Mom?" His voice was low, hesitant, but carried a weight that made me stop mid-motion. "Do you ever think about us?" I froze. The question hit me like ice water. My hands trembled slightly, and I turned slowly to face him, keeping my expression as controlled as possible. The faint glow from the kitchen light fell across his face, highlighting the intensity in his eyes. "Daniel," I said, my voice firm, "that is completely inappropriate. You are my son, and you cannot speak to me that way." For a moment, he looked startled, as though he hadn't anticipated my reaction. The defiance I had sensed earlier wavered, but the lingering curiosity in his eyes remained. I realized then that this wasn't mere misbehavior. It was a testing of limits, a boundary pushed in ways I had never encountered before. Some thoughts, feelings, and impulses are never meant to be acted upon. "This is one of them," I continued, choosing my words carefully, each one measured. "You must learn to control these feelings and redirect your energy." "This stops now." He nodded slowly, a mix of guilt and confusion crossing his face. But even as I tried to calm myself, I felt a rising fear. This was more than just awkward adolescence or misplaced curiosity. It was an obsession quietly forming, a dangerous fascination with a line that should never be crossed. That night I lay awake, the house silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. My mind replayed every encounter, every lingering glance, every word that had unsettled me. How had our relationship shifted so dramatically, so dangerously? How could I protect both him and myself without creating resentment or fear? The subtle tests of boundaries had begun in earnest, and I knew that the coming days would require vigilance. strategy, and unshakable firmness. This was no longer just about understanding feelings. It was about survival for both of us. The confrontation came the next morning, and with it, a weight I had been dreading. I awoke to find a note left on my bedside table, written in Daniel's familiar, uneven handwriting. My eyes scanned the words, each one sinking like a stone in my chest. I can't stop thinking about you. I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. My hands trembled as I held the note, the ink smudged from his nervous grip. A mix of shock, fear, and anger surged through me. This wasn't curiosity anymore, it was fixation. A dangerous crossing of a line that should have remained unbreachable. I took several deep breaths, forcing myself to remain calm. I had to address this directly, firmly, before it escalated any further. "Daniel, we need to talk," I said as I called him into the room. My voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable edge to it, a firmness he had never encountered before. He entered hesitantly, his eyes avoiding mine, hands fidgeting. I'm sorry, Mom, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he stammered, words tumbling out in a mix of guilt and confusion. "You crossed a serious boundary, Daniel. This behavior is not just inappropriate, it's unacceptable," I said, keeping my tone resolute. "We cannot continue like this. You need help to understand and control these feelings. This stops now, immediately." He swallowed hard, finally meeting my gaze. "I don't know why I feel this way," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to understand something very clearly," I replied, my eyes locking with his. "Feelings alone are not the problem. Acting on them in ways that violate trust and respect is the problem. There are limits in every relationship, and some lines can never ever be crossed." For a long moment, the room was silent except for the sound of his shallow breathing. I could see the mix of shame, fear, and confusion in his eyes, but also a glimmer of understanding. "I will help you, Daniel," I continued, softening slightly, but only in a way that is safe and respectful. "Professional guidance is necessary. You cannot navigate this on your own." He nodded slowly, the weight of reality sinking in. "I understand, Mom. I'll do whatever it takes." Although relief was tempered with lingering concern, I felt a slight easing of the tension in the room. Boundaries had been firmly set, and the first step toward rebuilding respect had been taken. But the road ahead would be long, requiring patience, vigilance, and professional intervention. The confrontation was harsh, but it was necessary, for both our sakes. Weeks passed since the confrontation, and slowly, a fragile sense of normalcy began to return. Daniel started seeing a counselor who specialized in adolescent behavioral issues, someone trained to help him understand his emotions and navigate them safely. The progress was gradual. Some days were filled with tension and silence, while others were quiet. Victories, small signs that he was beginning to respect the boundaries we had firmly set. At home, we implemented clear rules. Private spaces were respected. Doors were closed when either of us needed solitude. Conversations about feelings became structured, monitored by professional guidance, ensuring that honesty did not cross the line into inappropriate behavior. It was uncomfortable at first, both for him and for me. But with each passing day, a sense of trust, respect, and safety slowly began to rebuild. One evening after dinner, Daniel approached me cautiously, a notebook in his hand. He hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Mom, I wanted to show you something." I watched him carefully, my heart cautious but hopeful. He opened the notebook, revealing pages filled with reflections from his counseling sessions, thoughts about his feelings, self-awareness exercises, and strategies for managing impulses. "I've been learning," he said softly. "I understand now that some feelings, some thoughts are not meant to be acted on. I know I hurt you before, and I'm sorry." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you for saying that, Daniel. It means a lot. Learning boundaries is difficult, but it's necessary for both of us to feel safe." He nodded, a hint of maturity in his expression that hadn't been there before. "I will respect your boundaries from now on. I promise." I'm trying to be better. It wasn't just about a promise, it was about a commitment to growth, self-awareness, and respect. The tension that had once hung heavy over our home was lifting, replaced by a cautious but steady sense of stability. As I watched him leave the room, I realized that though the road had been harrowing, the experience had strengthened us in ways I hadn't imagined. Boundaries that had once been crossed were now clearly defined. Love, when tempered with respect and guided by understanding, could survive even the most challenging trials. The house felt lighter, quieter, safe once again. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe fully, knowing that while vigilance would always be necessary, we had taken the essential steps toward healing, together.